I'm Arya Schwartz along with Rachel Galligan, and welcome to the Winsidr show where it's all about the W, the Washington Mystics. What's their roster situation, and what situations are they facing during this free agency period? Let's dive in. If you like our show, please consider joining our Patreon community at patreon.com/Winsidr. For less than a cup of coffee a month, you can directly show support for the hard work we do covering the W. And don't forget to see our amazing staff's written content over at winsidr.com. That's winsidr.com. Remember, downloading the episode makes our stats look better and allows us to continue doing this important work. If you want to sponsor an episode or something else, email us info@winsidr.com. The Washington Mystics, a very intriguing, a very curious team.
Oh, it's a tough one.
It's a tough one. And the reason it's a tough one, as I'm sure we will get into, Rachel, is because it could, is Alicia Clark healthy? Is Elena Deladon healthy? There's so many maybes, ifs, whatevers you want to say that it really
the story
causes
on Mesa Man?
Yeah, what's exactly? I've heard because of FIBA, that there's rumors that she's not planning on coming back this season. Who knows? But I think it's pretty clear to me, and I think that Coach T, to an element, acknowledged that over the past 2 years by saying, what my point is basically, if you have Elena Deladon, then you're in a situation. If you have Elena Deladon, you're in a situation where you have that star power. You can make big moves.
Superstar power.
If you don't have a healthy one, then you need somebody else star power wise, because you have a ton of great players who fit in and can assist this team, but you really don't have somebody who can be that go-to player in crunch time in the clutch, and that's what this team truly needs. The Washington Mystics are a very interesting team, just in the sense of they could go so many different ways, right? If Elena Deladon's there, you have the star power to contend for a championship. And I don't think anyone questions that. She's carried teams before. But the question is, what is her health? Let's do what we've been doing for all the teams and run down who is currently on this roster. And then we'll go from there to kind of talk about what the tough questions are, what GM Coach T might be. I always call him Coach T, even though he's also a GM. What he might be looking at, considering doing, what's going through his mind. The current roster: Elena Deladon, Natasha Cloud, Alicia Clark, Ariel Atkins, Sydney Weiss, Erica McCall, and Megan Gustafson on a training camp contract, which we'll get into with a variety of other players. But the point of doing a training camp contract, for a variety of reasons, I'm sure there's other reasons to do it, but it doesn't hit your salary cap. So keep in mind that when I now say that they have 456K, 400,000, 56,000 K in.
You got it.
I can't talk right now. I'm working off no sleep right now. Baby has not been sleeping the past couple days. But my point is that doesn't include Megan's contract, so you have to take that into account. Now, with other teams, it's going to be more impactful than it is with the Mystics. But let's talk about the Mystics real quickly. The big question mark: Alicia Clark, where's her health? Elena Deladon, where's her health? And where does this team go from there? The other big question mark, I have to say, is Myisha Hines-Allen. We look at this team and you go, Natasha Cloud, that is a championship. I mean, yes, she's won a ring before, but that's a championship starting point guard. Alicia Clark, that's a championship starting 3, maybe small 4, whatever you want to play her at. And Ariel Atkins, similarly. Those are 3 and key players that you can start on a team and win a championship with. Granted, it's a ridiculous thing to say because they've all won championships, but my point is more so the bigger question marks are at the 4 and 5 and then depth. And the question really comes down to Elena Deladon in my mind and Myisha Hines-Allen. I'm going to assume Alicia Clark's going to come back healthy, even though it was a pretty crappy injury. But the question I have to think that's facing the Mystics today, and they've probably already decided this, right, is I guess it goes like this. Well, one, I say this: Myisha Hines-Allen, has to be like, do they believe? Because if you look at her stats, she had a ridiculous season, ridiculous stats in the bubble. And they tapered off last year, but they're still starters, still key players, still impactful stats from her, to the point where I'm saying to myself, okay, worst case scenario, Deladon's out for the season, or is going to be playing at whatever percent for partial season.
Mhm.
Maisha Hines-Allen and the Natasha Cloud, Alicia Clark, Ariel Atkins, what can you do with those four players? Because in my mind, that's where that star power comes in. Yes, that's a team that can make the playoffs. That's a team that can really frustrate people, especially considering who their coaching staff is. But the big question in my mind is, without star power, can they make a big push? And then it becomes, because of that, because there might be question marks around Elena Deladon, do they make a play for another player to kind of, you know, feed into that? Or do they say, we have enough faith in Maisha Hines-Allen that if given the reins or the keys to the car, she can truly drive us to success? I mean, what's your thought when you look at this confusing team?
No, I think that's exactly right. I mean, I have a lot of faith in how much Alicia Clark brings to this roster. I think that's a huge piece. And even if, you know, that's the biggest change to this roster, although, that would be assuming that Tina Charles is coming back. That's a whole different story. She makes this team exponentially solidified on both ends of the floor, just from a consistency standpoint. And I agree. I expect her to come back healthy, and definitely, knock on wood, we are a better league when she is in there playing, and she just makes everything that much better. But I think it does. It goes back to, like, okay, who is that X factor? Is it Elena Deladon? Tina Charles is an unrestricted free agent. I mean, it's hard for me because that's like you would like to think you get one of the two. And I know we can go down the rabbit hole of, Tina being happy and things didn't pan out the way that, some question marks there of, like, does Tina even want to return to Washington?
Can I
And
ask you
so
something,
it's
Rachel?
just
And sorry to interrupt you. I just want
sure.
to ask you this because it's been on my mind when it comes to Teen Charles for years. Um, she's been on successful teams, right? And in teams that weren't just throw Tina the ball and she's going to put up great stats, but you know what I mean? Like, team success, not
Sure.
Tina success. Has it
Yeah.
become too much? Like, is that just who she is at this stage in her career, where like she's gonna eat, but nobody else on the team's really gonna eat? Or is it possible to fit her into this team? I guess, like, having her, if Deldon's injured and she's your main star, I worry that you're gonna be back to the Washington Mystics of last year, a la the New York
Oh,
Liberty
yeah.
of the past few years when she was there, where it's just she's eating, the rest of the team isn't succeeding.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, people don't want to be, um, people don't want to hear that, but yes, that's a very valid point, and I think very, very worthy of some examination. Obviously Tina can put up incredible numbers when she's thrown the ball, as she should be. I mean, what happened last year was what Washington had to do. My thing is with the Tina Charles experiment, they never really had a chance to let it be what it was innately supposed to be because of all the health issues. So it's like, okay, do you get frustrated and everyone throws their hands up and, okay, let's move away from this situation, or do we give it another go? And obviously it's not going to look like the same blueprint as last year. Nobody wants that. So that might mean less touches, especially if we're talking about integrating Elena Deladon and Tina Charles into the roster together. And then you're integrating Alicia Clark into the roster. So for me, there's a selfish aspect of me as a fan that would love to see how that would work, and would love to see, just what this roster was supposed to be. I mean, last year was just a series of unfortunate events. And now, yeah, there is a lot of great pieces to this team. I mean, Ariel Atkins is phenomenal. I love Natasha Cloud. Maisha Hines-Allen, has solidified herself as this up and coming force to be reckoned with. And I definitely think Washington should secure her. But, I think with Tina, there are question marks on the defensive end of the floor. This team's got to get better defensively. And, they obviously have not been the offensive firepower, high octane offense we saw a few years ago. But, in the blink of an eye, they could be. And that's how crazy this is. Like, it could, the hope is it doesn't turn into what it was last year. So how do you avoid that? And those are questions that people deep in that office, probably have a much better understanding of than we do at this point in terms of the expectation moving forward. But I think for me, I do believe that Tina can win a ring. I do believe that she could win a ring in Washington. But it all comes down to health and just having a little bit more consistency. She just didn't have that other aspect to what she needed to do. And I do think in order for it to happen, you need to find a way to have Elena Deladon and Tina Charles healthy on this roster and playing consistently. And then you throw Alicia Clark in there. I mean, in my mind, and then you have Maisha Hines Allen, coming in and giving you 23 minutes, 24 minutes. I mean, that's a hell of a roster right there. But, you know, long story short, yes, I think she can win it. It's that management. But then I step back and I look at this situation in Washington and I'm like, God, I have no idea what to do. Like, I have no idea what's going to happen here because we all know how incredible this franchise has been and can be. But then I'm like, okay, well, you've got probably the best person in the world to be managing that situation right now, and so I put a lot of faith in that as
Yeah,
well.
no, I do. And that first round pick, I mean, to me, I just think realistically, even if Deladon comes back at 100%, you're going to want to restrict minutes so you can make a playoff run with her. You're going to want, like, my
Sure.
thing is like, at the end of the day, with the way this roster is built, too much is going to land on Tina Charles if you bring her back. If I'm Coach T, I'm saying I have faith in Maisha. We have the first pick, so we can either trade that to get something good, or we can get a Ryan Howard, someone who's going to be impactful, at a bigger position. And I don't know. I just think they really could hurt
Well, yeah,
themselves committing to Tina, even for one more year, kicking it down the road, not understanding that it could be a serious issue that's not going to be solved.
sure.
Um,
Sure. I also think real quick, sorry, I don't want to interrupt. I think that first round pick is something to be, you know, I just we did a deep dive on it on Just Women's Sports recently, just kind of like what we're doing here. And I didn't even get into that first round pick, and that's a huge other question mark. I mean, there's so many question marks. What direction do you go with that pick, and how could you utilize that pick to secure, you know, in my mind, this draft has a lot of exciting talent. Um, I would not be surprised to see that pick traded away for kind of that that staple in your franchise, like a high octane free agent that's just a complete game changer. I don't know who that is because again, all these other question marks have to be answered first. Is there even a possibility Tina wants to return? Is there a possibility Washington wants her to return? Is Elena healthy? All the things we've been talking about. But I would not be surprised if that pick was traded away. Um,
so just looking at this roster, I mean, a few players that I would love to see on this team, just experimental wise. Because again, I think to be realistic, even if Elena Deladon comes back at 100%, I don't think the answer is Tina Charles personally. And I understand a lot of people disagree with me on that.
sure.
And for me, yes, I would have loved to see what it would have been like. But also, you know what? Like sometimes you can get too lost in that mindset of like, we were so close, let's continue it. And it can get stale. And for me personally, you look at the rest of this
Sure.
roster, I think you're going to sink a lot into signing a Tina Charles that wouldn't necessarily solve the answer. For me, a player like a Stu, and a Stu coming to this team, obviously you bring in Emma, and I think this is a completely different story, right? Because Emma and Elena have so much of the similar
Mhm.
skill sets in many ways they overlap that if Deladon's back at full strength and you have Mies, that's a deadly combination, and the rest of the team can kind of ride that wave. If Deladon's not fully back, granted, we're going to be looking at more of a team, honestly, a more retooled team than the version that we saw in the bubble. And I think that's where things get a little scarier. What I like to see, you know, a Sydney Weiss version where she can be more of a facilitator and a scorer. Yeah. But at the end of the day, I think
Mhm.
this team, they're not SOL, but they are not a championship contender. Granted, you bring Deladon in, you have the best player in the world. You could very well argue you are a championship contender. I just think they have some young talent, and to not give Maisha the reins, that's
Sure.
where I'm
Yeah, yeah,
going
yeah.
basically with it. Is you give Maisha the
Go
reins,
get Sylvia Fowles. Screw it.
right? If they could, and you know what, Rachel? You know what? Like, let's break some news. There's some rumors. I've heard from multiple people. I don't know how public this is, but a few years back, there was
There
some
were.
discussion. The Washington Mystics were making a hard push to get Sylvia Fowles. I believe it was like the season that the Lynx were just trash with all of their
Mhm.
players before the dynasty completely broke up. But I mean, there's definitely interest. You have to think that a vet coach like Coach T, a vet GM, but again, like for me, call me crazy, and I know that I'm a homer, so maybe it's because it's a hometown thing, but I have to think that like the Lynx and the Mystics are equally close to a finals run. Obviously there's a lot of
Mhm.
question marks.
Mhm. Of course. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's hard to really break it down. I mean, you'd have to just break it down scenario by scenario, it's that type of free agent that I think Washington would have to go after. Literally a defensive player of the year, a first team type of player who comes in and fills the role of essentially what you'd be losing in Tina Charles. And depending on
Yeah.
how that fits along with and complements Deladon, I personally think it's kind of that center aspect. And then you have Hines Allen in there where you can kind of shift things up a little bit and maybe play a little bit smaller or shift some people through different positions. But I think if you get a dominant center in there, I mean, that's essentially what they tried to do last year. That's still kind of what they need, assuming Charles is not returning.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, that's it for this episode. Moving on.